We might go to question time. I'll call Senator Birmingham.
Well, thank you, President. President, my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. Does the minister believe it was appropriate to deliberately hide from the United States until the day before its public release the decision of the Albanese Labor government to axe the National Space Mission for Earth Observation program? What knowledge did the minister have of this deliberate strategy?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and I note your generosity to the opposition in citing question time early. Senator Birmingham, I don't agree with the way in which the question has been put to me. Our relationship with the United States is deep and enduring. We have significant cooperation on space, and in relation to this particular budget decision, the United States was advised ahead of time, as was appropriate. In terms of my engagement, this is obviously a budget decision. So the minister's been a finance minister; he'd be aware of budget processes in relation to that. We obviously have. And I'm a member of the Expenditure Review Committee, Minister, so that's why I was trying to allude to that, but I'm happy to explain it. We have had to make some tough choices, which is why this government has found budget savings to rein in the deficit to tackle inflation. We've started the hard work to rebuild fiscal buffers. Unlike those opposite, we're actually delivering on that, as opposed to making sure we have mugs on our parliamentary desk saying "back in black." A lot of mugs over there. But what I would say to the minister is, I was pleased at AUSMIN to be part of further announcements in relation to space programs, with an announcement which was made with the Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin at the Brisbane AUSMIN in July, which probably indicates our view about the relevance of this matter of space coordination to our relationship and to our ongoing cooperation across a range of fronts.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Supplementary question. Why was it, and I quote from government emails released under Freedom of Information laws, an express preference from the minister and PMO that the US be notified no earlier than Wednesday, the day prior to announcement? Did the minister or her office express concerns with this deliberately tricky and deceptive approach, or did the government not trust the United States with the information?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
It's really disappointing to see a senior member of the opposition, the alternative government, in fact the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and the former Trade Minister, to speak in those terms about our ally. Or imply for political purposes, imply for partisan political purposes, any issue with our ally. It says something about you. It says something about you and about the way in which you approach foreign policy in this place, Senator Birmingham. But what I would say to you is this. You asked the minister in the question, I think, a couple of times, one referring to me, the other time I assume referring to Minister Husic.
Quoting from your FOI.
Well, I assume the minister you are referring to was Minister Husic, because you were quoting from the DISA FOI. So I'll answer the question in two parts. First, in relation to the first part, the US was advised ahead of time, as was appropriate, and I can confirm that—
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Second supplementary. Was the Albanese government truthful in all of its dealings with the United States, particularly during the visit to Australia by NASA leadership in March this year? Or did ministers and officials mislead the US by pretending that the National Space Mission for Earth Observation program was continuing for months after the budget cut was already determined?
Thank you. Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
Well, I'm asked a question about truthfulness by a former member of the Morrison cabinet. I'm asked a question about truthfulness in relation to discussions with other allies. I mean, I might remember Senator Payne when she was dispatched along with the then Defence Minister, who were not allowed to do anything other than, if not deliberately mislead, certainly mislead by omission, the government of France and their counterparts in France because of Mr Morrison's obsession with secrecy. What I would say to you is that we have, as you might recall from Senator Blinken's comments at Osmin, we have not only an historically deep and trusting relationship with the United States, but as a matter between principles, we work extremely closely together, and we are good friends. And
Thank you, Minister. The time
treat
for answering has expired. Senator Marielle Smith.
My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. Can the Minister update the Senate on the ASEAN-Australian Summit and the East Asia Summit Leaders Meeting held in Jakarta last week? What progress can the Minister report on advancing Australia's economic interests in the region, and what can the Minister advise the Senate on in terms of our efforts with our regional partners to maintain stability and prevent conflict?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Wong.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the question from Senator Smith and her engagement on so many matters, but including on her interest in international matters and, like all of us, how it is that Australia navigates these very challenging strategic times to ensure peace, stability and prosperity. Last week I did join the Prime Minister at the successful ASEAN-related summits. Now, of course, this includes principally, at leaders' level, the East Asia Summit, where regrettably Russia has been a spoiler at the East Asia Summit. And last year, people might recall, Russia prevented agreement on a leader's statement, and once again this year they sought to undermine these efforts. Can I perhaps speak briefly about why the East Asia Summit is so important to Australia? We share an interest with ASEAN and the other members of the EAS in ensuring that this summit, which is such an important security forum for our region, operates effectively. So we played an active role in overcoming Russia's efforts and securing a negotiated East Asia Summit leaders' statement. We also supported an additional strong chair statement by Indonesia that demanded Russia's complete and unconditional withdrawal from Ukraine. And that statement recognised the need for all East Asia Summit participating countries to promote open channels of communication to reduce risks of misunderstanding and miscalculation and prevent conflict in our region. Those who have been paying attention will recognise that those channels are the kind of guardrails for practical conflict prevention that the Albanese government has been calling for. In Jakarta, the Prime Minister also notes the Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040, as developed by Nicholas Moore. The strategy maps out trade and investment opportunities in the region, which is, of course, a part of how we ensure we reduce reliance on any single trading partner.
Senator Marielle Smith, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. I note that after the ASEAN-Australia Summit and the East Asia Leaders Meeting, the Prime Minister travelled to Manila for the first bilateral visit by an Australian Prime Minister in 20 years. Why did the Prime Minister prioritise this visit, and why does it matter to Australia?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I'll take the interjection, and I'm happy to talk about Myanmar, but right now it is an important bilateral relationship, the Philippines, and one I hope there's bipartisan support for. I mean, this was the first bilateral visit by an Australian Prime Minister in 20 years. And that is a clear statement of our government's intent and priorities. You see, we have always understood, Labor has always understood, that Australia needs to work with the countries of Southeast Asia to achieve our security interests in a stable region where sovereignty is respected. It is less known about former Prime Minister Whitlam's visit to China that on the same trip in 1971 he also visited Japan and the Philippines. Australia and the Philippines have common strategic and economic interests, and there is more we can do together. While in Manila, the Prime Minister announced the elevation of our relationship to a strategic partnership. This means we will work even more closely with the Philippines to contribute to strategic balance and to shape the region we want.
Senator Smith, second supplementary.
Minister, over the weekend, the Prime Minister attended the G20 leaders' meeting in New Delhi. Can the minister update the Senate on the outcomes of that meeting and why engagement in the G20 is so important for Australia?
Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator Smith for this question about the G20. And our engagement with the G20 has never been more important, given the circumstances the world faces. As I said, we all know that Russia has been a spoiler at key international meetings. But despite their efforts over the weekend, the G20 delivered a strong consensus message on Russia's war in Ukraine. The statement was clear about the need to respect the UN Charter, the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty, and it called on all states to uphold the principles of international law. And the point that must be made over and over again in relation to Ukraine is that the principles in the Charter and the principles of UN of territorial integrity and sovereignty protect all of us. In several key aspects, this statement was stronger than last year's, but especially in relation to food and energy impacts of Russia's war, which are so important to our regional partners and in the global south. We will continue to push for war, and we'll continue to stand with Ukraine.
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. I refer the Minister to comments made last week by the Minister for Transport, Catherine King, when she said regarding the government's rejection of Qatar Airways, "I consulted colleagues prior to the decision, but the decision was mine." Can you confirm, given Minister King's claim she consulted with colleagues, that you, as this nation's Foreign Affairs Minister, were consulted prior to her making the decision in the national interest on a matter of foreign relations? And if so, what was the nature of that consultation and what date did that or those conversations occur?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator McKenzie for the question. Obviously, this is a decision that was a decision of Ms King's. I'd make the point that this was a decision that, in fact, changed nothing. It was a decision that this is a decision that went to the status quo, and Minister King made a decision. As the Minister for Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, Minister King has confirmed she consulted with a number of colleagues and weighed a matter in a range of matters in determining whether an expansion was in Australia's national interest. As Minister for Foreign Affairs, I was one of the ministers consulted. I do not intend to go into the detail of those consultations, and I can probably point you, Senator McKenzie, to many occasions where Senator Payne said the same thing in answer to my question.
Minister
wow.
Wong, please
you can take
resume
point of
your
order
seat.
on that. I just answered your question.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator McKenzie.
On direct relevance, I fully appreciate Senator Wong's
your point
not
of order,
going to
Senator
the detail
McKenzie.
of the conversation. It was my question, President, was the date that those conversations occurred.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Your question went to the nature and the date, and the minister is being relevant. She may not be answering in the way that you want, but the minister is being relevant. Minister Wong, please continue.
I'm sorry, Senator Ruston. Did you have something to say you wanted to say to me?
Order.
Another foreign policy genius.
Senator
The
Wong.
minister considers a range of factors when determining expansion of bilateral air rights is in our national interest, as did Mr McCormack when he made an identical decision. I have made clear I don't propose to go through detail of that. Certainly, one of the things I would say about the way our government operates is we do have discussions with colleagues and consultations with colleagues, but I have responded to the question and I have nothing further to add other than to make this point. This is a decision that is consistent with the decision that Minister McCormack made. It's also consistent with the decision that others have made on that side, that is to look at what is the national interest.
The time for answering has expired. Senator McKenzie, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, what date were you informed of the decision to deny Qatar Airways application?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister.
I will confirm this, Senator McKenzie, but my recollection is I became aware of that decision after the decision was made. But I will confirm that.
Senator McKenzie, second supplementary. Order. I've called you, Senator. Order. Order on my left. Order on my left. Order. Senator Cash. Order. Order. This is wasting time. I called you, Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam President. Minister, did you inform the Qatari Foreign Minister or Ambassador before the decision was made public?
Minister Wong.
I'd make the observation that it would not be normal practice for a lot of those bilateral engagements to be conducted in the public eye, Senator McKenzie, and I would invite you to perhaps engage with colleagues who have held this portfolio. What I would say to you is that I'm just wondering if Senator Ruston would like to say something.
Please continue answering the question. Order. Minister Wong, please continue answering the question. Minister Wong, have you finished your question?
So there are. I would not normally, or nor would anyone in this.
Foreign policy. You did
Senator Watt.
I would not normally, nor would I think anyone in this role, go through chapter and verse what is discussed between interlocutors at foreign minister level. I would say to you that we continue to engage with Qatar on a range of issues.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cox.
Thank you, President. I rise to ask a question of the Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Minister Farrell. Just last week, Energy Resources Australia announced their intention to apply for an extension of their lease at Jabiluka mine, which sits within Kakadu's National Park. It is estimated that the uranium deposit at Jabiluka is one of the largest in the world. This comes off the back of concerns of ERA being able to fund rehabilitation at the nearby Ranger mine. It also occurs in the context of Australia not being a party to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. My question to the Minister is, has the government had an application for the extension of uranium mining at Jabiluka?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Cox for her question and her courtesy in giving us some advance notice about the nature of the question. An application for the renewal of the Jabiluka mineral lease is not currently before the government, so if ERA have made that statement, they have not formally made an application for an extension of that licence. However, we will consider information about Jabiluka at the appropriate time. As you say, it's in the heart of the Kakadu National Park, and that discussion will take place in good faith with all of the parties involved. If ERA do finally apply for the renewal of the lease, it's the Northern Territory Minister who will have to consult with and act on the advice of the Commonwealth before advising ERA of its decision. And we note that ERA and Rio Tinto have expressed commitments to the long-standing Jabiluka long-term care and maintenance agreement that provides that Jabiluka will not be developed without the consent of the Mirarr traditional owners. And of course it's understandable that the traditional owners and those working on country apply appropriate scrutiny to any decision that or any application that might be made. The Albanese government is committed to sustainable mining to protect our pristine environment, and that's why we're establishing the national—
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cox, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. At the recent Labor conference in Brisbane, this Labor government reaffirmed their commitment to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Whilst there is talk of more uranium mining, does this government have a timeline for signing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Cox for her first supplementary question. There is, of course, a difference between mining uranium and, of course, the proliferation of nuclear weapons. But as you say, this issue was discussed at the recent ALP National Conference, which I was present at. And can I say this, Labor has a proud history of advocating for non-proliferation and disarmament and is committed to the goal of a world without nuclear weapons. And we support the treaty.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat.
President, just a point on relevance. My direct question went to a timeline. So with the last 16 seconds, can you point the Minister in the direction of the timeline, please?
I believe he is being relevant. Minister Wong.
I apologise to Senator Cox and the President because I was just distracted, but I would raise again. It doesn't sound to me like this is a supplementary question from the original question. In fact, the treaty TPNW is probably better addressed to my portfolio, not as a resources portfolio, and in fact a number of others have raised it. And certainly I don't recall the treaty being discussed in the primary question. So I will ask. Obviously, the Minister can answer what he is able to in his portfolio, but I again request that we look at whether or not supplementary questions are in fact supplementary.
Senator Cox, I have sought advice, and the clerk has advised me that you have jumped portfolio, and as Minister Wong has informed you that Senator Farrell will continue to answer the question. Yes, Senator Cox.
Yes. Can I just clarify that the words treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons was actually in the original question, yes. But I appreciate Senator Wong's...
Thank you, Senator Cox, and I noted the word was there, but I'm nevertheless advised that you have jumped portfolios. Senator Farrell.
Thank you, President. And the government is engaging constructively to identify realistic pathways for nuclear disarmament. And for this reason...
thank you, Minister Farrell. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cox, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. It seems that there are only a few large shareholders at ERA that want this extension. Will the government commit to not allowing uranium mining to continue at Jabiluka's mine site?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Cox for her second supplementary question. The truth of the matter, I think, Senator Cox, is that we don't wish to preempt what may happen at some stage into the future. In fact, it would be, I think, inadvisable, particularly for me, to make a comment in relation to that. An application for the renewal of the Jabiluka mineral lease is not currently before the government, and the Albanese government is committed to sustainable mining to protect our pristine environment. That's why we are establishing the National Environment Protection Agency. The government recognises the Mirror people are opposed to mining at Jabiluka. And the government recognises that ERA and Rio Tinto have a commitment to the long-standing Jabiluka long-term care.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. The time for answering has expired. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, since the Albanese Labor government took office 16 months ago, getting wages moving again has been a top priority. At a time when cost of living is an issue for Australians, we know that better wages will help to ease the pressure on household budgets. What measures has the government already delivered that will get more people into work and see them get better wage outcomes?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question and for her years of advocacy in supporting wages for workers across this economy. It is good news, President, that we have seen the fastest increase in wages for some time. We've got new ABS data. I know Senator Ruston hates it. I know she hates it, but the reality is
Minister, please resume your seat. Order on my left. Senator Ruston, that's 3 or 4 times I've called you. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
The reality is that under the former government, wages were growing at 2.4% for average workers, and they are now increasing by 3.9% in the first year of the Albanese government. So workers are better off. Workers are always better off under a Labor government because they know that we have their back, that we care about the wages that they earn, because we know what a difference it makes every day and every week when you're putting your budgets together, your household budgets, what a difference it makes if you are seeing improvements in your wages and improvements in the security of your jobs. And that's what those opposites spent 10 years undermining. They undermined wage increases, they undermined job security, and we are here in yet another area cleaning up the mess that was left behind by those opposite. The average worker, President, is earning $1,400 more a year than they would have under the wages increases under our government, that if they'd continued to grow in the way that they had been growing under the former government at just such a 2.4%. That's $1,400 more for the average worker to help pay their bills, put food on the table and to deal with some of those cost of living increases. So workers are better under wages from wages under this government, and they always will be, because those opposites spent their whole time trying to undermine them and make sure wages went backwards.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Minister. You just outlined an impressive record on wages for the first 16 months of this government. We know the Albanese Labor government is not wasting a day to support the economy, but there is more work to be done. What is next on the government's agenda to boost productivity growth and keep wages moving in the right direction?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. While there has been a lot done, we know there is a lot more to do, and that's why we're working on expanding the productive capacity of the economy. Another area where we inherited the worst productivity growth for the past 60 years was under the decade, just so happened to coincide with the decade that those opposite were in charge, turning up and doing nothing, as usual. We are now rebuilding Australia's industrial capacity through the National Reconstruction Fund, supporting the transformation to net zero, again something still controversial for those opposite, building a bigger and better trained workforce through our skills agreement. We're leveraging capital and lifting investment. We're delivering more efficient markets. We're reforming our economic institutions. We turn up every day to work in the national interests of this country. We don't miss an opportunity. There's a lot to do to improve productivity across this economy, but this government is focused on it, as we are on wages and conditions for working people.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you. The former government had low wages growth as a deliberate design feature of their economic architecture, which resulted in a decade of wage stagnation for Australians. How does the Albanese government's productivity agenda, with a focus on getting wages moving again, differ from that of the former Liberal National government?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Well, remember those opposite how when there was talk of minimum wage workers getting an increase of $1 a day, how the world was going to end, the sky was going to fall in. Well, that tells you everything you need to know about the policies of those opposite. Unlike them, we want to see strong, sustainable wages growth as part of the solution to cost of living challenges in our economy. We don't see it as part of the problem. And now, by delaying consideration of the Closing Loopholes Bill, those opposite are now delaying further pay increases for mine and aviation workers. But should we be surprised? Because this is in their DNA, to make sure that wages are kept low, conditions are in favour of the employer, not the employee. They're delaying minimum standards that will save the lives of gig workers. They voted to trap permanent casuals in insecure work for longer. They voted to delay the criminalisation of wage theft, and they've spent the entire time in government keeping wages low and holding workers back, and nothing's changed with them in opposition.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Special Minister of State, Senator Farrell. The Constitution requires the proposed law to be submitted to the electors so electors can see what they are voting on in a referendum. Minister, do you agree the proposed text to be included on the ballot paper is the full text of the proposed law change as contained in the enabling legislation the Constitution Alteration, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Voice 2023.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Roberts for giving me the courtesy of some advanced knowledge of this question. Well, some people just like me. I hate to say, I can't help it, but some of them actually get a better. Some of them actually get a better answer if they, give me a bit of advanced notice. Hard to believe, I know. Look, I have been made aware of that there are claims by one legal academic that the form of the proposed constitutional amendment and/or the ballot paper question do not satisfy the constitutional requirements for a referendum. But the referendum legal issues have been considered in detail by the Constitutional Expert Group, the Solicitor-General and the Parliamentary Inquiry, and this gives me some assurance that the amendment and the question are legally sound, Senator Roberts. Historically, all referendum ballot papers questions have either used the short title until 1951 or the long title after 1951 of the Constitution alteration that passed through the Parliament. The question for the Voice uses the long title, consistent with the practice for over 70 years. The government is aware of a potential challenge to the ballot paper reform. This application has not yet been accepted by the High Court and is therefore not an active proceeding. And at this point, I'm advised that it probably is inappropriate to comment further on that possible legal challenge.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you. Section 128 of the Constitution makes no provision for a summary of the change to appear on the ballot paper. Section 128 requires the proposed law change to be submitted in full. Form B of the Referendum Machinery Provisions Act 1984, which allows for a summary, is in breach of Section 128 of the Constitution. Minister, will you ensure the Voice ballot paper is compliant with the constitutional provisions for a referendum?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Roberts for his first supplementary question. Yes, Senator Roberts, I will ensure that the wording in the question on the referendum on the 14th of October is compliant with the Constitution. Can I reiterate my earlier answer that all of the advice that I've got from the Constitutional Expert Group, from the Solicitor-General and from the Parliamentary Inquiry that examined this issue is that it does meet the existing constitutional requirements. I should say that my office has at all times tried to facilitate your ability to get advice directly from the AEC about any issues that you might have with the ballot paper. And
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. A case could and will be made to the High Court that including a misleading, feel-good summary on the referendum ballot paper, rather than the actual details of the change, is a breach of Section 128 of the Constitution, which may have the effect of misleading voters and rendering the result void. Minister, are you or your government about to make a $364 million mistake?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Thank Senator Roberts for his second supplementary question. No, I don't believe so. I have seen some of the reports that you are referring to. Interestingly, one of the reports I think that you're relying on was from Michael Detmold, who was my constitutional law lecturer in 1972 at Adelaide University. But that doesn't mean, Senator Roberts, unfortunately, that everything he may or may not say is correct. But Look, you'll be surprised, Senator Scarr. I did. That's I not only passed Constitutional Law 1, but I passed Constitutional Law 2. That was even more surprising.
Thank you, Minister.
No.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Brockman first. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, what was the real wages outcome for the financial year 2022-2023?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Brockman for the question. Well, if you listen to my previous answer, I was talking about how wages are moving faster than they have. Look, I know, get excited, but we've currently got 1 minute and 45 seconds for me to answer this question, and I intend on taking every last second of it. Because wages are something that matter to this government, unlike you, who had it as a deliberate design feature of your economic architecture to keep wages low.
Please resume your seat. Senator Brockman.
President, this was an extraordinarily narrow question. Past rulings from presidents have indicated that a glancing reference to the opposition is acceptable. We only have a very narrow question, and I ask you to draw the minister to the question or sit her down.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brockman. Order on my right. Order. Senator Watt. Order. Senator Brockman, I will remind the senator of your question, and I'll also remind you that the senator said she intended to answer it in full. Minister Gallagher.
I did say I was going to answer it in full, and I am going to take the time that's allocated to me to answer it. And I can understand why those opposite don't want to hear an answer about wages, because it was such an appalling feature of their economic plan was to keep wages low and to ensure that working people didn't get the wage increases that they deserve to deal with the cost of living. And to ensure living standards remained high. Now, as Senator Brockman, or former President Brockman, with that instruction that he gave me in the point of order to you, Madam President, would know, that we are experiencing a period of high inflation. So that does impact on real wage outcomes. And we have said that inflation is staying higher for longer than we would like. And the highest quarter of inflation actually occurred under the former government's watch in the March quarter of 2022. So whilst inflation remains high and wages are improving, and they are improving, then real wage outcomes will be affected. And we are seeing that. It's forecast in our budget. Well, you all have the budget papers in front of you. I know what you're trying to do. I am being honest about the issue.
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, the minister has had 1 minute and 50 seconds now of the 2 minutes she intended to use every possible second before answering the question. In the remaining 10 seconds, I invite her to be drawn to the very specific question: does Minister Gallagher know what the real wages outcome was for 22-23, and will she tell the Senate?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I'll draw the minister's attention to the question. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, CPI was, I believe, was 6%, and wages was in the order of 3.6 from memory for the 22-23 financial year.
Has expired. Senator Brockman, first supplementary.
So, negative real wages. Reporting from Ellen Ramsey from NCA Newswire and Kimberly Keynes in today's West Australian quotes Treasury analysis claiming that the average Australian worker is $3,700 better off than a year ago. Does the government really think it can con Australians into believing they are better off under an Albanese government, given that the Treasury analysis quoted does not take into account the impacts of inflation and a year of falling real wages under your government?
Thank you, Senator Brockman. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, the analysis is correct, and under the average outcome of 2.4%, you would be getting less than you are getting now because we supported the minimum wage increase.
Please resume your seat. Order. Senator Wong and Senator Birmingham. Minister Gallagher.
Because they have a government that argues for the minimum wage workers to get a wage increase. Remember those submissions that your government didn't actually support? That we supported a wage increase for aged care workers, 15%. Not only supported it, funded it, making a real difference. So yes, the analysis is correct, and this government takes wages and wage increase seriously, unlike you, which kept them deliberately low for the past decade. That's what working people got, a decade of wage stagnation, because that is the economic architecture that you put in place. And as inflation moderates and wages grow, we will see real wage growth. And the budget published this months ago, I'm surprised you've just cottoned onto it.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Brockman, second supplementary.
Minister, despite this government's extreme spin, can you explain how Australians are richer when last week's national accounts showed GDP per capita had fallen for 2 consecutive quarters under Labor and by negative 0.3% over the year to June?
Senator Gallagher.
Well, working people are better off under Labor because, one, we actually want them to get wage outcomes and are putting in place policies to deal with it, because we're investing in skills and jobs of the future, because we're bringing back advanced manufacturing and creating investment opportunities for businesses in this country. We're dealing with the economy's single biggest transformation opportunity with the transition to net zero, again something that those opposites still haven't come to terms with or agree with. These are the issues that governments need to focus on so that we can seize the opportunities, not just for this generation but for generations of the future. So that is why we've been so focused on our economic plan, on making sure we're getting the settings right, and improving workers' wages and improving workers' conditions are part of that economic plan, because we care about working people and their lives, unlike those opposite.
Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Foreign Minister. Today marks 50 years since the Pinochet regime came to power in Chile. Given the extensive evidence of Australian ACES support for the coup, will the Minister commit to apologising to the Chilean people and declassifying related documents so that the Australian community and the Australian nation can avoid making the same horrible mistake again?
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator Steele-John for the question. And yes, I am aware of the coup d'etat in Chile, which took place this day in 1973, and that has been, I think, the tragedy that was has been well documented. On this anniversary, we recognise the widespread suffering, the torture, enforced disappearances, human rights abuses which occurred during the brutal dictatorship for over 17 years. And I also want to recognise the Chilean diaspora and its contribution to Australia. There are many who arrived in this country as a consequence of what occurred in 1973 and the ensuing dictatorship. And this commemoration serves as a sombre reminder of the importance of safeguarding democracy and the rule of law against attempt to use violence for political gain. In relation, I do have some concerns about some of the commentary that's been engaged in by the Greens political party. I appreciate the position you have on the US alliance. It is not the position. It is not the position that this is. Would you like me to respond, or you just want to? You can all
Minister
talk.
Wong. I beg your pardon, Senator Steele-John. I thought you were holding up a document, but you're seeking a point of order.
Can't stand. This is how
I appreciate that, but usually you raise your hand. I thought you had a document.
Thank you, President. On relevance, my question specifically related to the Minister's giving to the Senate a commitment to declassify documents related to ACES's involvement in the coup. I would ask you to draw her to that element of the question.
Senator Steele-John, your question had a very broad preamble, which the Minister is also entitled to address her response to. the minister is being relevant. Minister Wong.
I was actually making the point, Senator Steele-John, that whilst I understand that you have your political party and you personally have different views on the US alliance, we do not share those views. Well, Senator Shoebridge, is it your question or is it Senator Steele-John's? Well, I'm happy for you to take a point of order, Senator Shoebridge.
Senator Wong, I'll call Senator Shoebridge to order. Senator Wong, have you finished your contribution? Order. Senator Shoebridge, I've called you to order. Minister Wong, have you finished your contribution?
And I note that some of the commentary from the Greens has very much focused on the alliance point.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, other countries have or are in the process of declassifying documents relating to their involvement 50 years ago. Nearly 300 Chilean Australians have signed an open letter addressed to the Department of Foreign Affairs asking for the declassification and acknowledgement of ACIS involvement. Minister, why will you not show transparency on this issue and ensure the community knows what was done in their name in the lead-up to the coup of '73?
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and to Senator Steele-John. What I would say is I certainly won't be, and no foreign minister would be responding to a declassification request on the floor of the Senate, and any request for declassification of national security documents would be considered in the usual appropriate way. It's not a political issue. It is consideration of how these matters should be dealt with. I appreciate the political point you're making, and I don't think it would be reasonable to suggest that anybody in this chamber would be anything other than horrified by what occurred in terms of the oppression during Chile's dictatorship. That what happened to the Allende government is something that many of us have been engaged with.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Steele-John, second supplementary.
Will the government commit at least to making reparations to Chilean Australians impacted by the coup Australia was involved in, and reform the ACIS security apparatus so that the Australian community and its intelligence agencies are never again brought into a campaign to destabilise a democratically elected government on behalf of the United States?
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Minister Wong.
Well, I think it's QED on the US alliance point, which is the point I was making to start at the start of my answer. But what I would say to you is governments of the day, I mean, the security agencies serve the national interests and they are subject to oversight from ministers and increasingly from entities like the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence Services, which I served on, and that is a good thing. They should be subject to oversight. But ultimately, political decisions are matters for which politicians should take responsibility. And I think Labor's position in relation to the coup, the overthrow of the Allende government, a duly elected government, and the subsequent dictatorship can be demonstrated by Labor history.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Grogan.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Wong. At last year's election, the Australian people resoundingly voted for action on climate change. Can the Minister please explain to the Senate how the Albanese government is getting on with the job of reaching our legislated climate targets and delivering cleaner, cheaper energy for the Australian people?
Minister Wong.
Be patient. Be patient.
Thank you, President. I'm happy to take another question from another great South Australian senator, two in a row to me, and I'm very grateful for that, on the issue of climate targets. And I'll take the interjections from those opposite. We were all reminded about the fact that there is one party who voted against price release.
That's right.
Price relief for Australian families, and that's those opposite. Well, Australians did vote for us to work to deliver cleaner, cheaper and more reliable energy, and that is the action that the government is seeking to take. Yet, despite the very clear message from the Australian people at the last election, it's quite clear that those opposite still don't get it. And you know when we last saw that? We saw that over the weekend at the Nationals Federal Conference. The Nationals Federal Conference, I missed it, but I came back to all these wonderful quotes. Member for New England, Mr Joyce, submitted a motion that called on the federal party room to, quote, abolish its policy of net zero, end quote. And who lined up to support it? Mr Pitt and Senator Canavan. And of course, the Liberal leader, Mr Dutton, tried to shut down the chaos by saying, actually, they might be saying that, but the coalition had recommitted to net zero. And as for the national leadership team, well, I tell you what, such leadership, they abstained. They abstained. Oh my goodness! You've got the man who wants to be the Prime Minister, the alternative Prime Minister of Australia, Mr Dutton, saying we've recommitted to net zero. You've got Mr Joyce looking to abolishing the policy of net zero, and then the leadership from Mr Littleproud.
Senator Wong, order on my right. Senator McDonald.
Point of order. I think we're all fascinated to hear about lower electricity under Labor.
That's not a point of order, Senator McDonald. Minister Wong.
Oh well, yeah. What I'd really like is for the Nationals to stand up and explain to us how it is that leadership is demonstrated by abstention.
Minister Wong. Senator Grogan, first supplementary.
Thank you for that answer. There are so many things to refer to over the weekend's extravaganza from those opposite. Can the minister please inform the Senate why large-scale renewable energy projects are so important to deliver cleaner, cheaper energy to the Australian people, with the flourish of leadership that we see from Senator Wong?
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Minister Wong.
Well, investing in renewable energy is not only cleaner, it is cheaper for households, businesses and industry, and we are working with state and territory governments to improve energy security and reliability by attracting investment in firmed renewables. The CEO of the Australian Energy Market Operator said projects that do this will play a key role in protecting Australians from energy risks and challenges ahead. But what do we see from those opposite, and particularly the leadership of the Nationals? Well, first, we see the great leader, the member for Maranoa, not only abstaining on the motion I referred to in the primary, but publicly calling for a pause in the rollout of renewable energy. A pause. And then another motion passed at their conference demanded a moratorium on all large-scale renewable energy projects. Large-scale renewable energy projects. I mean, who is actually running policy over there? Is it Mr Dutton, who's recommitted? Yep, Senator Canavan put his hand up.
Minister Wong. Minister Wong, resume your seat. Minister Wong, thank you. Order. Order. Senator Grogan, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. There are some who continue to promote the idea of nuclear power. Can the minister please outline why scientists, industry, business and governments have not pursued nuclear power?
Thank you. Before I call the minister, Senator McKenzie, before I call the minister, I would ask that Senator McKenzie, if you have something to say, take some time during the week. Senator Canavan, are you on a point of order?
Look, I respect your ruling there, President, but I mean, we have had a question which just has almost obsessively and exclusively focused on the opposition, or one of the opposition parties' political conference. I think it's fair to have some leeway. Then I've got no problem with Senator Wong doing that, but if you're going to give it, you better be able to receive it too.
Senator Canavan, the opportunity for receiving it is not question time. It is other opportunities during the week. I would invite I would invite senators, particularly on my left, not to interject because the minister is entitled to respond to interjections. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. It is widely known that even small modular nuclear reactors are tracking up to be up to five times more expensive than firmed wind and solar in 2030. I don't know whether all the economic, sort of rational economic thinkers are over there. 5 times more expensive. Nuclear costs rose 36% between 2009 and 2021. Solar costs fell 90% and 72% over the same period. But what we know is those opposite don't prefer ideology to evidence. Ideology to evidence. And, you know, last week it's been reported that at their party room, they had members put the idea of nuclear power plants on the agenda. They're clearly keen to add to the 22 failed policies. They want another one. They want to add to the 22 failed climate and energy policies, whether it's underwriting new coal, while businesses were backing renewables or nuclear.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. I refer the Minister to comments made last week by the Minister for Transport, Catherine King, when she said regarding the government's rejection of Qatar Airways, "I consulted colleagues prior to the decision, but the decision was mine." Earlier that day, you yourself, Minister, remarked on ABC's RN Breakfast, "We've been pushing the expansion of flights with a whole range of countries at the moment. I can't say that I specifically had a conversation with her, but I'm aware her department made it clear they were dealing with this issue and going to make a decision." Can you confirm that, despite Minister King's claim she consulted with colleagues, that you, as this country's Minister for Trade and Tourism, were not consulted prior to her making a decision? And what date did you learn that she had made the decision?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and can I thank Senator Chandler for her question. Look, you're correct. I was asked about this issue on Radio National last week by that very good journalist, Patricia Karvelis, who wanted— shout out to her. She asked me that very same question, President, and this was the answer I gave. Look, I can't say that I specifically had a conversation with her, but I'm aware that her department made it clear that they were, dealing with the issue and going to make a decision about it. And I note that Minister King was, in fact, asked this question in question time in the other place today, and she said, and very clearly said, "I consulted with relevant colleagues as to the normal, proper process." But can I make it very,
Order. Minister Farrell, please continue.
Well, Senator McKenzie, it was Minister McCormack who made the very same decision that Minister King has made. But this is what Minister King said. Can I make it very, very clear yet again that the decision—
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, point of order on direct relevance. And the minister's already killed a lot of the time by actually repeating the same quotes that Senator Chandler had in her question of Minister King. The question, though, was he consulted? Was he consulted? Does he have any knowledge of whether, in fact, somebody had a conversation with him or not?
Senator Birmingham, the minister was referring to the first part of the question. I will draw the minister to the second part of the question. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Look, I made my position very clear on Radio National. Look,
Order.
I said, look, I can't say that I specifically had a conversation with her, but I'm aware that her department made it clear—
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Chandler, first supplementary.
Thank you, President.
Order
Minister,
on my right.
Have you received any advice from your department regarding increasing flight capacity from other countries into Australia? And if so, was Qatar one of those countries?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And this government routinely has discussions with other countries and other players in the aviation sector. I myself launched the Vietjet flight, first Vietjet flight from Ho Chi Minh City to Brisbane, and of course since that time, of course, there are flights now from Ho Chi Minh into to Perth. I also can report that subsequent to us getting a ban lifted on group travel from China into Australia, we've now got China Southern flying into Australia. Singapore Airlines, another.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator McKenzie, I've called you over and over. I've got Senator Chandler on her feet. Senator Chandler, are you now going to your second supplementary? Thank you.
President. Can you confirm for the record, Minister, that you and your department in fact recommended to the Minister for Transport that she grant the Qatar request to help deliver more flights, more seats, more freight capacity and cheaper airfares?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. What I can confirm, Senator Chandler, is that this government is serious about repairing all of the damage that you lot did to the tourism sector in the 2 or 3 years.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Farrell. Senator Chandler, I beg your pardon.
Point of order, President. On relevance, my question did not make any reference to the previous government. It was very specifically about the advice provided from the department.
I'm going to remind the minister of your question. Minister, if you can get to Senator Chandler's question. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Senator McKenzie. Minister Farrell, please continue.
Thank you. But unlike the way you treated the tourism industry in this country, we have started the process of rebuilding tourism in this country, and bit by bit, I don't know why you want to keep talking the tourism industry down. I don't, unless your strategies while in government were part of a general strategy to undermine the tourism industry. We don't want them undermined. We want to rebuild. We want to rebuild the tourism industry that you sought to destroy.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Wong.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice.